So hello there everyone and welcome to the Deercast, episode 26. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but we have managed to pin down the very elusive Mike Robinson, who's actually joining us from France at the moment, I believe. He wears many hats, and I'm probably going to miss one of these out, but as well as being a restaurateur, chef, deer manager, venison buyer and producer. He's also a YouTube and TV star. So, as I said, feel very lucky to have had him on the podcast, or to have him on the podcast, so I should say. So thank you very much, Mike, and welcome to the podcast. I think you're our first guest to be joining us from a foreign country.
Oh, well, there you go. It's nice to be special for something.
Yeah. So, Mike, I'm sure most of our listeners will know exactly who you are. They'll have followed all of your antics on Farming the Wild and on your YouTube channel. But at the same time, do you want to just quickly give everyone a kind of précis as to who you are and what it is you do?
So, yeah, I mean, you nailed it pretty much. I'm probably by profession a restaurateur who's obsessed with using wild food. And I've always had a hankering to generate my own ingredients for my restaurants, which led to deer management, which led to managing land, which led to making TV shows, and to where we are now. So yeah, a bunch of different things.
Amazing. And you're currently out in France filming for
France, filming in the Champagne region with a friend of a friend who has a very large private property with which is sort of semi-enclosed, but it's enormous. It's sort of thousands of acres and has a lot of wild boar, etc. in that area. And they needed to finish their season up. And so we came out for Farming the Wild to harvest some wild boar, probably some sort of medium and young wild boar, to do some cooking, to do some butchery, to prepare, to play around with wild boar, and it's just very exciting.
And how far ahead are you recording for Farming the Wild in terms of the episode you're recording now? Are we going to see that in 2024, 2025?
Yeah, no, you're going to see that in September, October this year.
Oh, amazing.
And will your I noticed you've just sort of become back active on YouTube again with your videos that are really good. Are they kind of on top of the Farming the Wild series, or?
I because Farming the Wild was so took so much of our time, because I don't just make Farming the Wild. I make Wild Game Masterclass. I make Fishing the Wild. So I make a fishing show, a shooting show, and a cooking show. So I make 30 episodes of TV for Outdoor Channel in the US every year. And so what I've done this year is Fishing the Wild's a big show, and but it takes up all my summers. And so what I've done this year is my friend Joe Pike, who's spearfishing legend and my mentor on that front, is taking over the helm of Fishing the Wild as the anchor. And that frees me up a little bit. So it has given me time to dedicate a bit more time towards YouTube, which I've wanted to do for a long time. So I try and put out a film. There's another one coming out today. I try and put out a film about every 2 weeks on YouTube, and just doing what we do, go out, manage some deer, cook some food. Over the summer months, there'll be a lot of spearfishing, a lot of scallop diving, a lot of coastal foraging. There'll be tanks, there'll be cars, stuff like that.
Yeah. So that's something we missed out of your intro. And one of our listeners, we'll get on to listener questions in a minute, but one of our listeners did ask which your favourite tank was, and I hadn't quite realised you had as many as you did until I went scrolling through your Instagram channel and saw God knows how many. But yeah,
it's not that many, but I can't afford as many as I'd like. But hopefully in 3 or 4 years' time, I'll have scratched that itch and I'll have a full. It's basically the tank collection is. The armored vehicle for the collection is limited by the size of the barn I rent. So, and I reckon I've got space for 3 more. So,
wow.
And I've given myself 3 years to do that. I try and bring another one in each year,
Yeah.
And do they ever get used in the deer stalking enterprise extraction?
Well, this year all my other vehicles conked out, and there was a week where the only vehicle I had was a 1950 Jeep, a Korean War Jeep, and I used that in the woods. It was actually tremendous. Very, very good. Not so great in the rain, but with non-functioning windscreen wipers, but very capable. And yeah, we might go and do a camp and cook in the half track this spring. Go and spend a weekend camping with a half track and go and hunt some wild boar in the Forest of Dean. I think that might be quite good fun.
Amazing. And we should say we're recording this sort of early April, so we've just finished the sort of main bulk of the fallow season. How's it sort of all been for you? You sort of taking stock now of how it's all been going?
Finished.
Yeah, not over yet.
Look, I adore it, and fallow deer are my first love, and I absolutely love stalking fallow and managing fallow. And I make a point, even though we've got, you know, Warren, our professional deer manager, and we probably have about 50 or 60 in total syndicate places that we on our various bits of land that we give people the opportunity to go out and do. But I still feel it's really important that I personally go and do it. So I'm out on average through the doe season 3 days a week, 3 times a week.
Wow. That's a hell of a shift.
So I go out probably 3 times a week on average. So and it might be for 2 hours, it might be for a whole day, but it's important, and I enjoy it. And you know, it's nice to be able to say that a decent proportion of the deer that we sell and the venison that goes through deer box, I've had a hand in doing.
Yeah. And to wind the clock back a little bit, were you a deer stalker first or a chef first?
I was a chef first.
Yeah.
I'm gonna prop my phone up. Yeah, I was a chef first. I've always loved the idea of wild food since I was 10 or 11 years old, but I became a chef by accident. I never intended to be a restaurant chef, but it happened. I was living in France 30 years ago and ended up washing dishes in a smart restaurant, and ended up cooking and enjoying it and realizing I really loved it. And when I came back to England, and I had to scratch that itch of having my own restaurant, I bought my first pub, the Potkill, and I got taken under the wing of an amazing game dealer and butcher called Alan Hayward from Vickers Game. And Alan literally mentored me and taught me how to shoot deer. And if you're going to learn to shoot deer, then a game dealer is the person to teach you. I can tell you that, because there is a certain ruthless efficiency about the way they do it. And so I mean, meat has always been at the forefront. I've never been remotely interested in antlers or what hangs on the wall in any way, shape, or form, and I still not. Interestingly, I'm out here with one of my great buddies, Christian, and he's the same. He manages deer, but he loves deer with antlers. He's just got a thing about them, and it's what floats your boat at the end of the day. I have, you know, deer of all ages need to be controlled and managed, so I have no issue with that at all. It's just personally, I'd rather shoot a doe over a buck any day of the week.
Yeah. So I'm desperate to keep asking you questions, but but our listeners have asked, I think we probably had the most questions for you than any of our previous podcast guests. And to be honest, most of the questions I would ask, our listeners have kind of asked anyway. So probably slightly premature. I'm just going to dive straight in with some of the questions that have been asked. And in no particular order. The first one is, I don't even know how you say it, Venatio Deer Management, and he's asked, when will Mike be fully committing to a deer box diet, a carnivore diet, but venison only?
Never. I'm a chef. I love cooking, so I love fish. I love eating fish. You know, I love cooking and growing vegetables. I genuinely believe that venison is an amazing core of a really healthy diet. I mean, I've been through a real regime over the last 8 months. I've lost 14 kilos from where I was, got much fitter and much healthier. And I think that venison has a real part to play in that. But I don't believe it's something that I would ever eat solely as a protein. I think it's wonderful and delicious. But part of the problem in life, if you're too obsessed and you have something if you solely stick to one thing, you get bored of it and then you don't appreciate it.
Yeah.
That's why I couldn't stalk deer 7 days a week, because I mean, now I'll be honest with you, I got to the end of March and I thought, well, I could go out in April and keep going and shoot some bucks, but actually, you know what? I'm done.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Get ready for November.
Yeah, I mean, I never talk about the numbers we shoot, but you know, I personally have culled a lot of deer this year to myself, and it feels like enough, if you put it that way.
Yeah.
So moving on to another, we've got one in from Finn Bainbridge, who's a regular contributor, who's asked, what would be your best quick dish using venison, any cut, for a sort of uni student budget, I think he's asking.
So I adore mince, I'll be honest with you. I think venison mince is the greatest product in the world. I really do. I think it's incredibly hard to beat and high in protein, low in fat, incredibly delicious. And I honestly think it's hard to beat a speedy venison chili. I can make a venison chili in 20 minutes, start to finish. And we do it at least once a fortnight at home. And what I do is I brown off the mince in some olive oil, and then I rehydrate a bunch of guajillo chilies, dried guajillo chilies. You can buy them for peanuts on Amazon, and rehydrate them in hot water for 15 minutes. Throw them in a blender with some of the juice, a bunch of garlic, and some canned tomatoes, and some coriander stalks, etc., and blitz it all up and make a spicy paste. Then pour that in, and a stock cube, you know, a little bit of red wine, and simmer it for a hot 20 minutes. And you've got an incredible venison chili. And when I was at university on a uni budget, I used to go home, and I didn't shoot deer in those days, but I used to shoot pigeons and rabbits like you wouldn't believe. And I would go back up to university with bags full of pigeons and rabbits. And I would cook rabbit and pigeon chilies all the time. Same sort of recipe.
What did your housemates think of it, or were you at RAU or Hart Branham's or somewhere like that where it was accepted?
I wasn't anywhere near that posh. I was at Bangor, studying forestry at Bangor. They'd never heard of a show called Gilet in Bangor, I can tell you. And I was doing forestry, and I think they thought I was a little strange, but it was. I loved it. I've always loved cooking with wild food.
Yeah. Amazing. So a question here from Mark Gold. He said, if you could change one regulation relating to deer, game, firearms, what would it be?
That's an interesting one. I know Mark, by the way. Hello, Mark. And Mark's the motor master for Bonhams. He's an amazing guy. Let me think. If I could change one regulation with deer, firearms, whatever, it's hard to say. Personally, I really dislike the idea of deer being allowed to be shot at night. A bit contentious, perhaps, but I actually am someone who really loves and adores deer. And I think that when you open up night licenses, you really, really open a can of worms, and it doesn't give the deer a chance. A lot of people will probably be sticking pins in effigies of me for this, but night licenses, I wouldn't allow people to shoot deer at night. I think we can cull enough deer in the day if we put enough effort into it. Personally, that's how I feel. I'm not saying in certain parts of the country I know there's a massive problem with deer, but that's my own feeling. I actually am very soft on deer, even though we process and shoot a lot of deer. I really love them, and I don't like the idea of them being hounded day and night. And so I personally wouldn't. I'd be very careful about allowing deer to be shot at night.
Yeah. So Mark has asked another question as well, which if he knows you, this might be a slightly leading question. He may have teed you up for something here. So he said, if you could own only one type of rifle, what would it be?
One type? I'm assuming he means caliber. I don't know why. I'm assuming that.
He hasn't said. All he said, yeah.
I like I like bolt action rifles. I'm so used to them. And I have to say, again, lots of people will probably shout at me for this. I've shot everything. I've shot 300 WSMs. I've shot 308s. I've shot 3006s. I've shot 243s. I think the 6.5 Creedmoor is the most versatile caliber for Britain that's ever been made. And I think a good bolt action rifle in 6.5 Creedmoor with 120 grain bullets does everything you ever need.
Yeah.
Very good.
Prior to the 6.5 Creedmoor, what is it you were using?
Well, prior to the Creedmoor, I used two. I used a 243 and a 300 WSM.
Wow. And now the Creedmoor's filling both of those gaps for you, basically.
I actually have started to really like a 6.5 PRC, which is an amazing caliber. So we have two different types of land that we manage. We have a lot of woodland and smaller area fields. And for that, I find the Creedmoor with a big moderator just supreme. And then we have some land with big open downland fields. And I love the 6.5 PRC. Just has the edge on big windy fields. It's just a great round, but it doesn't punish you like the old WSM did.
Yeah. And on those big windy fields, what's the sort of distance you and your team are potentially taking shots out to?
Up to about 300, 350 yards.
Fair enough. There's some hell of a shooting there.
Well, you have no choice. The deer,
No.
some of the fields are 1,000 yards across, and there's 200 deer sat in the middle of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw I think it was one of your recent YouTube videos, wasn't it, with a 300 WSM?
Yeah.
Sorry, 6.5 WSM.
PRC.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a hell of a shot.
It's a hell of a rifle. I mean, but again, look, I think the most important thing with any firearm is practice. You have to, you owe it to the animal that you're hunting to spend a lot of time practicing. And once you get to know that rifle and you know its foibles, you know what it drops, you know what it does in the wind. Once you know those things, we only shoot, over 150 yards, we only shoot deer in the body. And on those bigger shots, but still you can go horribly wrong if it's very windy on a crosswing. So you owe it to the animal to know what you're doing.
Yeah. So your answer to this question may be one that you've just given in terms of practice, but someone called Borden Flight has asked, do you think it's a good idea to encourage people to take headshots as a norm?
No, actually, I don't. I think that there are recreational deer stalkers who are probably the mainstay of British deer stalking, who are essential to managing deer in Britain because they are harvesting enormous amounts of deer that need to be done. However, there are also people who I suppose I just fall in this bracket, but there are people, particularly in the gamekeeping community, etc., who are very time poor, but who have to control large numbers of deer and who get a lot of practice with their rifles, who spend a lot of time behind the rifle. And when you are confident and comfortable and it's not blowing a big crosswind and you have a dead rest, the forehead of a deer is a 2.5 to 3 inch target, and that should be more than possible. And I will say this as someone who sees things from both sides of the divide. And 20 years ago when I started, I got so much grief for shooting deer in the front of the. We only shoot deer in the front or the back of the head, never in the side, ever. There's a lot of that negates a lot of the jaw issues that people talk about. But a lot of our deer are shot in woodland. In woodland, a lot of the time you do not see a clear shot on a body on a deer. So if you're going to control the deer, you can't go to a landowner and say, I'm sorry, I couldn't shoot the deer, I couldn't see its body. So you have to control them. So, but practice. And the piece of equipment that's made that feasible is the quad stick.
Yeah, absolutely. We're big quad sticks fans. And we noticed actually the other day in your videos, you use the fifth leg, which we also use, but you use it backwards.
No, I use it, I think, the best way.
Not backwards in that sense, but you use it on the front use it on the near side rather than the far side.
Yeah.
I had this conversation with Klaus from Viperflex at a trade show, and he said to me, oh no, they should be used at the front. I said, Klaus, how can you adjust them quickly at the front? Actually, on the back, it works a treat. You put them on the back, you want to move the rifle, you just do that and it moves and it's easy. So I find on the back is just absolutely mega. And the thing is, you are basically bench rest shooting deer off 5 legs. You really are. There's no chance involved. When you're locked in and rock solid, and when you do it enough, you can get really quick. You really can get quick. And Once you're all locked in, and you can put that crosshair right between the eyes of a deer at 100 yards, and it is no different to shooting a target off a bipod.
So when I saw you using it on the back
Yeah.
Of some sticks, I thought I'll give it a go, having previously had it on the front, and I've got to admit it is considerably easier and quicker to set up. I think because the back is in some ways is less fussy, because you can adjust the rifle along the back in terms of the back of that stock. So no matter what angle it's at, it in some ways doesn't matter. Whereas the front, you have to have pretty well upright actually to get the rifle level. So.
And I'll tell you another tip I did. I've retrofitted both my rifles halfway along the slope of the stock underneath. I have put a sling stud in the bottom of the stock, and I don't use that for a sling. I use that to hook into the V of the back of the quad sticks. And
interesting.
That means that the upright of the quad stick does not get in the way of your wrist or your hand when you're on the grip of the rifle.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, okay, fine. Well, that's interesting. We're going to have to try that.
Yeah.
It's really, really funky little retrofit.
Yeah.
Halfway between the pistol grip and the end of the butt, in the bottom, you drill a hole and put a little stud in, and then you hook that in to the V of the stock, and then you're completely your hands don't, your wrist doesn't impact on the upright of the quad sticks.
Wow. Well, you've done a lot of stick testing, but we've never had anyone suggest that before, so we're going to have to give that a go.
Yeah,
do some testing. Yeah, brilliant.
Amazing.
They are incredible. Moving back to the sort of listeners' questions, we've got a question here from Craig Chapman 96, who has asked, what would be the best way a newbie can get into deer management as a career?
As a career, it's very difficult. I mean, I don't know how many professional deer managers there are in England, but probably on the fingers of one hand. Scotland, of course, you can still become a professional stalker if you have the will and the determination to go down that route. But I mean, I'm a hybrid deer manager. I don't rely on it for my income. Deerbox is a business that Ben, my business partner, and I, who I know was on this podcast, started 3 years ago, and off the back of lockdown, and it has grown and grown. But by gum, we've invested a lot of time and money in it, and we both have other careers which allow us to keep reinvesting money in the business and keep growing it, because it doesn't make us a great deal of money at all. I mean, it will do. Hopefully one day we may make some money out of it, but we both feel very strongly about the need for domestic venison consumption in Britain. And the only way the issues with deer in Britain are going to be solved are by domestic public consumption of venison, not just by selling to restaurants, because they're going through hard times at the moment. I can speak from experience on that front. So even though my self-proclaimed goal is to get the British non-hunting public, in other words, not listeners to this podcast, eating venison.
Yeah.
Because it's the only way that we will develop a strong domestic market.
Yeah. Well, we were lucky enough to come and interview Ben, actually. When was it? Last year. And have it around Deerbox, and it's an incredibly impressive setup.
Yeah, well, it's going to grow. It's going to grow because we've kind of hit the capacity it can do at the moment. So we need this coming season, starting in November, we're planning on doubling what we did this year. And this year doubled what we did the year before. So,
it's going to... In terms of the number of deer you were processing, or what was going out the door?
Both.
Wow.
So, it's not easy, because we have to, our model is I think, a really good one, because I want customers from the great general public ordering boxes of a frozen venison delivered through the post. I never want to deal really in fresh venison if I can avoid it. So, because this way, instead of being a seasonal business, we're an annual business. And so that's really, really, really crucial. So we're looking at growing the business significantly this year and next year, the year after. 2025, 4, 5, and 25, 6. We'd like to double the business each year because, we need to be honest. This year has been an interesting one. Again, climactically, it's been incredibly difficult. I think anyone who stalks to it will agree that this February and March has been pretty brutal. The rain has meant that very few people who rely on vehicles to get round deer have been out and about. Most people don't want to rip up their tracks. Most keepers won't have managed to shoot a lot of deer because they don't want to destroy the ground, understandably, going out there. Farmers have issues with deer on big fields because extracting them is almost impossible in sopping wet conditions. I mean, we do it because we are motivated because we need the venison. So on the land we manage, we're physically carrying deer off fields 1,000 yards across.
It's pretty crazy, isn't it?
And that growth, is that going to come from culling more deer on land you already have, or is it going to come from acquiring more land, or is it going to come from opening the doors of Deerbox up to saying, well, we're going to partner and buy deer off more people?
We already do that. I mean, Deerbox doesn't only supply the deer that it harvests itself. It's already past that point. What we do is we partner with really good people who care about the carcasses. And for us, that's everything. We want to be the best, highest quality venison, and quality starts the minute you pull the trigger. That's the thing. The care you take over the deer once you've harvested and shot them is reflected in what we ends up going out to the public. So we are obsessed with quality, and quality is everything. So we work with certain partners. We've got a dozen or so partners we work with. That's increasing this year. And people who, and what we do, and this is a thorny subject, but we don't regard ourselves as a game dealer. We're solely venison. We don't do any other game. So, and yes, we partner with people, but we don't just take deer. People don't just turn up and throw them out the back of a Land Rover, and we don't just give people a little bit and buy them in. We have pre-existing arrangements, and if people want to sell to us, then we want them to sell to us for the whole season, from August to the end of April, right, for fallow deer. And we want all their deer, and we want to agree a price that will run the whole year long. And that we think is incredibly fair. We don't want to necessarily work with people who think, well, we're going to ditch them this week because next week we might get 10p a kilo more from someone else. So we believe being very fair, and we want to be good, but we really want quality. So we want quality, and we'll pay for quality.
Yeah. And one question that actually sprung to mind after we'd had our podcast with Ben, and I sort of wish I'd asked it at the time. We talk a lot about sort of shooting deer with copper versus lead on this podcast, and one thing I did actually want to ask you was, in terms of the customers base that you have, both sort of restaurant and through Deerbox, what are their views on non-toxic ammunition? Is it something that they're really aware of, interested in? Do you get people who ask the question? Or
no, I don't think people really ask the question. However, I honestly am a great believer in preempting the future. The future is non-lead. Whatever people say, that is the future. And so we made a decision when we started that we would go non-lead. And all our venison is non-lead. And we don't have a problem. People are very happy to adapt to it. A few diehard people get quite grumpy about the subject, but I'm afraid that ship has sailed. And it's I genuinely think it's pointless fighting it. And I have to say, my experience, and I have a lot of experience, is that the really good non-lead ammunition is extremely good. I mean, we use Hornady CX ammo across the board for all the deer we harvest, Warren, Ben, and I, and it's exceptional. It never seems to fail on body and head shots and neck shots. It works extremely well. I mean, I'm here in France, about to hopefully shoot a lot of big wild boar, and that's what I'll be using.
So can I ask a very selfish question? Body shooting deer with copper, have you noticed any differences in terms of processing carcasses compared to body shot with lead?
Yes, slightly more damage with lead.
Yeah. With lead?
Yeah, no, with non-lead. Slightly more. No, slightly more blood splash with non-lead. There seems to be a lot of blood splatter. But I will say probably 75% of the carcasses Deerbox processes are head and neck shot.
Yeah. For that reason, or just the nature of where you're stalking you and the skill of your stalkers?
Yes. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, we don't force it, but we would prefer it. And I always believe that it's down to an individual stalker to decide when a head or neck shot is appropriate versus a body shot.
Yeah.
You know, if it's towards the end of the season and you're on big open fields, yes, both Ben and I will shoot deer in the body. But I'll tell you this out of interest: a badly placed body shot is a really awful thing to deal with when you're processing. The problem is a lot of stalkers will look at the carcass and see a little entry hole and an exit hole and go, oh, no damage there, and until the skin comes off. and then we see what actually has happened.
Yeah.
And that's the difference.
Yeah. So non-deer related, this was a question from If and UP, which says, boar related question, are boar here to stay in the UK, and where do you see them in 10 years time?
Well, I'm a massive fan of wild boar, and I actually believe that wild boar in controlled numbers are good for a forest environment. There's a lot of studies have been done. We have a knee-jerk reaction to animals in this country. I mean, unfortunately, the Forestry Commission doesn't see it the way I do. I think they'd like everyone dead. But and I find that disappointing, because actually I think when they're controlled and when they're looked after properly, and they're as a result not allowed to do agricultural damage and et cetera, et cetera. I think a modest amount of wild boar is a lovely thing to have. It would be a shame to see them all go. It really would. And the commission is certainly very keen to kill everyone they see. I mean, they seem to be anyway, which I think is a real shame. I mean, I really do. That's just my personal opinion. They have their policies. They do what they do on their land. But I'm a bit soft on animals generally, and I don't like to see things absolutely mullered, you know. So, but on the other hand, you know, land we look after for wild boar, you know, I think we do a pretty good job. The landowners seem very happy. Boar damage is restricted. We certainly cull the necessary numbers. We cull as many as we need to cull, but I would hope they're here to stay.
And do you think we'll ever see it on the Deerbox website? A bit of wild boar? Or are you
website?
Oh, it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
We cull about 60 to 70 boar a year.
Wow.
So but it's very popular. So when it goes on the website, it goes straight off the website.
Yeah.
I love it, and I love wild boar. I think they're clever, fascinating animals. And let's face it, they were here until we got rid of them. So to me, it seems poetically right that they should be here again now that they're back.
So would you also have the same opinion in relation to other species? So thinking of something like reintroduction of, say, lynx, which some people argue would be a good thing in terms of helping to control potential deer populations.
Being pragmatic,
yeah,
I suspect that they'd rather eat sheep.
Yeah.
Let's face it, what's easier to catch, a sheep or a deer?
Yeah.
I have a feeling. I don't know, honestly. I'm not a predator biologist, but I have a feeling that if the wild boar does not go around munching on. It's not a carnivore. It's an omnivore. It actually likes roots and bulbs and small insects, and it turns ground over. And there's a lot of studies that have shown that small numbers of boar in a forest actually help the health of a forest, because they allow the songbirds to get access to worms and things in the winter when they're turning over soil and things like that. So And I would think most deer stalkers would agree with me. We don't want to see them killed. We'd want to see them managed. And I think that's the key here.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So going back to one of the other questions we've had is from from Craig Craig TV, I think. What's the most important thing to Deerbox? Would it be improving the sort of price that you're getting paid for carcasses, or is it improving the quality? What's your sort of main objective behind it?
Price is an interesting one. Prices for us depend on our cost of processing at the end of the day. There's a limit. We pay as much as we possibly can, depending on our cost of processing. But what we don't do is play games with people. We don't get 2/3 of the way through the season and then drop the price by 75% and say that's all there is. You know, we are very consistent in what we pay. But on the other hand, we'd rather someone talk to us before a season starts and agree a price, which we'll then say, up until this point in the year, we'll pay you X, and then after this point in the year, we'll pay you Y. And that's all there is to it, you know, so everyone knows where they stand. But the simple fact is our driver is quality. So we need to know that people look after their chillers. The time from the deer being harvested to going in the chiller is X. And they're taking temperature records. They can, you know, basic food hygiene. I come from a restaurant background, and food hygiene is absolutely everything. And it's the same with meat. And I think a lot of people fail to realize that we're having to put venison up against abattoir killed meat as a comparison with the public. So we can't take chances or risks with these things. We can't hang them in an old Coke fridge and that we haven't tried the temperature of for 6 months. We don't know that it's running at whatever. And we just can't do that, because it'll only take one. It'll take literally one massive problem with some really poor food hygiene by someone who doesn't really know what they're doing, and the whole venison industry can be tarnished overnight. So quality is everything, and I'm a big fan of and this is slightly contentious, Britain has a 2-tier system. It has the exemption whereby you can go to your local authority and get them to come and see your fridge and your kitchen table with a piece of plastic on it. And then a lot of people do it like that. And that allows you to sell to a restaurant. Now that's okay until something goes wrong. Because once something's going wrong, you don't have any recourse. You, the processor, at whatever level, are not protected. The great thing about getting Food Standards Agency approved to be a proper approved game handling establishment, an APGHE, is that the vet has checked your records and has inspected every carcass and stamped that carcass. That's what we provide people. You know that it's been government vet approved and checked. And thus, if there's a problem after that, we can say that carcass number 30529 was checked on this day by this vet. It was hunted by this person. It was killed at this time. It was refrigerated. When it came in, we took its temperature, so we knew that it had been kept in the right chiller, etc., etc. It's called due diligence. So this is my concern about the exemption for small quantities, is that it can be abused, whereas the FSA cannot be abused.
Yeah.
So.
And what do you think about the sort of there's a new British wild venison quality assurance scheme that's sort of aimed at probably the sort of mid-level, I'd say, between AGHEs and your sort of, you know, hobby stalkers?
I just think there should be one standard. I really do. I think having all these different things is a nightmare. And I have to say, on that level, there was no consultation with that program with people like us. There was almost none. It was done with the Forestry Commission, government, etc. And I always get quite draconian about this. Everyone in deer management in Britain involved in it always talks about needing to shoot more deer. We hear this in the press every day. Need to kill more deer, need to kill more deer. Yes, we do in certain areas of Britain, 100%. It's not across the whole of Britain or in England, but it certainly is. We do need to. But here's the problem. Why do you think it is that at some points in the year, certain game dealers turn around to all their customers and go, to all their suppliers and go, we're not taking any more deer, which they did this year? And most, a lot of them in November said, hold on, we're having 4 weeks now, we can't take any more deer or whatever. Well, the problem is that everyone is trying to sell to the same market, which is hospitality, because exports become incredibly difficult. So thanks to Brexit and various other things. So you have this nightmarish scenario that people want to go and harvest deer, but they're getting paid peanuts for their carcasses. And sometimes the game dealers will turn around and just go, no, not taking any more. The reason for that is we don't have a decent market domestically for our venison. We're not reaching out to the general public. So I say to government people like this, and I've talked to these people, I've talked to them, and I said, you're starting at the wrong end. If there's a keen market from the general public for our product, for wild, sustainable venison, then there will be decent prices paid through the year for that venison. Stalkers will be motivated to go out, and the deer will get culled. But it has to start. They're starting at the wrong end. The government's dishing out night licenses, talking about killing more deer, doing all this, and stalkers are only too keen to go out and do that. But at the end of the day, they then expect game dealers to always be available to take the carcasses. But if the market isn't there to sell the venison, they can't take the carcasses. So start with the market. We're starting at the wrong end. All these initiatives start at the wrong end. Need to kill more deer, so make it easy for people to kill more deer. No, need to kill more deer, promote it with the public, provide grants for marketing venison, etc., etc.
So if we were going to sort of accept your sort of suggestion or model of FSA only, that was the way to go. What's your vision for sort of the route to market for most people's venison? Is it that exemption that people have had before, where they can process it on their kitchen table, that just goes, and everyone sort of has to either set themselves up as an FSA approved business,
I did it. I did it, and I was selling 8 deer a week, and I was FSA approved. The reason people think, oh, I can't do that, I can't afford it, is because they haven't actually looked into it. You don't have to have very complex systems to do it. You just have to talk to the FSA and go through the process.
That's really interesting, because I've always assumed that that level.
To interrupt, you just said the magic word. You assumed.
Exactly.
Right? And we know what assuming does, right? So that's the point. I'd like to say this. When I set up originally Robinson Wild Foods, I was doing 6 to 8 deer a week, and I was I was an APGHE, and I was doing it in a small larder with 2 rooms, and I had a freezer and a fridge, and that's how I was doing it. But it is not expensive to get the vets to come out and inspect these deer. It isn't. It's time consuming, and there's a lot of paperwork, and there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through, but you can do it if you want to do it. Now, going back to what I think government should be helping us with, rather than just providing fridge vans and chillers and giving us grants for those. No, they should be, what stalkers should be doing is getting together in small cooperatives. And one of the things British stalkers are often not good at is being cooperative with each other.
We tried to start one local to here. And ultimately, well, what it came down was exactly that. People didn't want to collaborate. There was a sort of a mistrust of other people in terms of, if we were going to have one communal chiller, everyone was going to put their carcasses in. Everyone was like, it's a really good idea, but what if so and so puts in a bad carcass, and then all the rest of us have got to deal with it? And it was that assumption that someone else is going to do something wrong, and everyone actually came to the conclusion we'd rather do it ourselves individually in our small little silos.
Well, then what it needs really is, if government did a grant scheme that said, okay, we'll provide 20 grand. If you can prove that you can process 500 deer a year, we'll give you this grant, and a bunch of you get together and create a larder that is approved. Right? It's actually not an expensive process. Fiscally, there's not a lot of cost involved in doing it. You have to have a bare minimum of good quality equipment and gear. You have to have a clean room, a dirty room, a processing room. You have to have those three things. But Fisher will make a game larder that will fulfill all of those in a single unit.
No.
And so again, but that then allows the public to have trust in venison. I know this sounds quite brutal, but the public has to trust what we provide. And if a government vet has inspected that carcass and agreed that the process you followed was good, then the public will trust it.
Mm-hmm.
If you say to the public, this is the best venison you can ever eat, I know because I butchered it on my kitchen table, we can't ask them to trust us. And I know I'll get hate for this, but I'm literally being pragmatic here.
Don't worry, we won't put any of your contact details in the description.
Yeah.
Then that way, no one will know where to find you.
But it's true. It is doable. It's down to the willpower of the people.
Yeah.
I did it. I did it with all my own money. Right. It cost me to set up the original Deer Mox. Probably cost me 30 grand. Okay, I'll tell you that now. I don't mind saying that, of my own cash. And it was painful, but I did it. But I'm so glad I did it. Mm-hmm. And you can now, as I say, that much money, if the government gave us a grant, said, OK, we'll pay 2/3 of the cost of one of those containers that has a cold room, a dirty room, a clean room and a processing room, and then you have vac pack machines, a bandsaw and a freezer, you could do what I'm doing perfectly legally.
Yeah. So changing tack slightly, but also sticking on the idea of big shiny things that cost a lot of money. We have a segment of our podcast that's called Bobby's Bits.
Yeah.
And it's I promise it's not as bad as it sounds. Essentially, Harry's younger brother was taking a gap year. It was a few years ago now, and was working on his gap year, but living at home. So like blissful period of life, no rent, no bills, but earning a living. He's a mad keen deer stalker as well. So spent pretty much all of his disposable cash, I think, on buying rifles, scopes, binoculars, you name it. He'd got it. So this section of the podcast is sort of named after him, and it's really where we ask our guests what's the one piece of kit or equipment you couldn't live without, but equally what's the one piece of kit or equipment you're currently hankering after.
It's a really tough one for me because I'm very spoiled and I've got most of what I need. Can I say I'd like an M4 Sherman tank?
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest thing we've had on.
Yeah. How much is one of those?
£500,000. But sadly can't afford it. No, that's really the one thing I'd like. I know I'm never going to have one. What would I really like? Let me have a think. I actually need a new stalking vehicle. I've got to be honest. My old green Discovery it's still going, and I could keep it going forever, but I don't want to drive more than 50 miles in it. So I think my big shiny piece of kit this year is I'm going to have to buy myself a new pickup truck.
And are you going to do, because I followed with great interest your journey where you bought your Discovery, put the Raptor paint on it, sort of kitted it out. Are you going to do the same thing with another truck in terms of you're going to buy something sort of that you're going to make customized to what you want, or are you just going to go out and buy a new Ford Ranger and be done with it?
Probably going to buy a new Ford Ranger and be done with it, but I'm going to keep the old Discovery for local work.
Yeah.
And because I really love it, and it is a great wagon. And bits go wrong about once a month, and it conks out fairly regularly. But I do love it, and I have to spend like $1,000 a year trying to keep it going, and it's probably worth about 3. But it's nice because I like keeping old vehicles on the road because I think if anything, you're not going, environmentally keeping an old vehicle on the road, I personally believe is better than churning out new ones. Mm-hmm. And yes, a new Ford Ranger is probably exactly what I'll end up getting because it's a very utilitarian vehicle, good value for money, doesn't look quite as probably can't use the word, but quite as I'm going to say as the Discovery does, and doesn't look quite as like I'm going to go out air coursing. And it's I get stopped quite a lot in the old green Discovery.
It's very recognizable. So I was on my way to Tetbury a few months ago, I think it was, and I saw you pull out and sort of like go across the road, and I was like, I know who that is. It's Mike Robinson. Yeah. I almost messaged you on Instagram. So great, as you pulled out, a great big plume of smoke came out the back of it, and I was going to message you and be like, I think you need a new cat or something like that. But
currently I need a new exhaust manifold. That's
right.
the thing, because you put your foot down, you wait 30 seconds, then it starts going. But I'm very fond of it, and it's made it through the season with only 2 conch outs. One was a prop shaft, and the other was some electronic widget. But I will get a new Ford Ranger, but I will keep the old Disco because I'm very fond of it. And it's brilliant for where I live near Cirencester, because I don't tend to drive more than 10 or 15 miles to go stalking, and it's great in the woods. I've got to say, as a shout out, that Raptor paint, amazing.
And did you do just the spray can version, or did you properly mix it up? And
I used the Raptor Duo kit, and this is a great, anyone with an old stalking vehicle, I really recommend this. It took me a few hours to prep it. You know, I just sanded it down roughly, and then I masked up all the windows and whatnot, not that well. And then I bought the kit, it cost 120 quid, and you get the spray gun and bottles with the color tint. You shake them up, the bottle screws into the spray gun, and then you attach it to a compressor, and then it took half an hour to paint. And
Wow.
I'll tell you this, still, I've driven through barbed wire fences, I've driven through trees, brambles. It doesn't scratch. You can't scratch it. I mean, it's amazing. And they say that 3 coats will stop a .22 rifle bullet.
what?
That's what Raptor says.
That's amazing.
That's got to be tested, I feel.
Well, I've got an old stalking truck sitting in the shed, so maybe that'll have to be our next test.
Honestly, it's the best thing I ever did to a vehicle. And if I ever bought a crappy old one again, I'd do it again.
Yeah. Interesting.
Brilliant.
So what's the one bit of kit you couldn't live without then, Mike? If your new bit of kit's a new pickup truck,
the one bit I can't shoot deer without, I'll be honest with you, are quad sticks. I was finished with those. I haven't used a bipod in 3 years.
Wow, really?
I can't do without them. And you know, there might be some little tweaks one could make to the Viperflex. I've never tried any of the others, but they are a good product. And I have managed to completely destroy a set. Klaus, if you're listening, I've destroyed a set. But my last set of they're held together currently with bits of paracord and what do you call them, cable ties, because everything's broken. But that's just, again, I probably went out 120 days this year, so that's use.
Yeah, that's pretty good going. Well, we're going to the stalking show tomorrow, so we might see Klaus there. He normally comes along, so we'll have to mention that to him.
Would you tell him I need a new set? And but I think he's done a brilliant job with those. I think they're a remarkable product. They're sturdy, particularly the carbon fiber ones are light. And what I do, I'll give you a tip for that. The last little tip that I found has made a real difference is I get a piece of 1-inch pipe lagging, cut a little wedge out of it and stick it on the rail. And then I put a couple of bits of insulation tape to hold it on. And I find then when you put the stock of the forestock of the rifle on it, it squidges down into the pipe lagging, and it doesn't rotate on the front when you're locking in to shoot. And it gives you an ultimate perfect rest.
Interesting, because we were having this discussion because one of my rifles has got a very sort of slender fore end, and it's curved on the bottom. So when you put it on, exactly.
1-inch pipe lagging, 4 inches of it, and you replace it once a month. 2 bits of insulation tape, 1-inch pipe lagging, slot it on, lash it on. It'll change your life.
And you say cut a V in the
because the pipe lagging's just got a slit in it. If you just jam it on, it kind of flares open. So if you trim it a bit with a Stanley knife so that it slots straight onto the Viperflex fore end, honestly, it's just amazing, because you find when you then put the back leg out and you lock the front of the rifle in. I mean, the rifles I've used this season are my prototype Savages that I'm working on, and they'll come out later this year. Quick plug, they're amazing. And those those have a flat forend, but I find that they dig into this foam and there's no movement, like none. Like you can just pick the hair on the deer's head to shoot. It's amazing.
I'm going to go and do. I've got some pipe lagging in the garage. I'm going to have to go and try that this evening. There you go.
There you go. Full of tips. Well, Mike, we're conscious of the rest of your evening, but we just want to say a massive thank you for coming on the podcast. You've been immensely interesting. It's incredibly kind of you to share your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time in France.
Well, thank you, and I hope this has been somewhat useful and interesting. And I thank you for what you guys are doing. Honestly, anything any of us can do to get the word out and get people out there, and also, do you know what, to bring more people into deer stalking. And you know, we are an aging demographic, and this is one thing I would say. You know, there are less than 40,000 people in the UK with deer on their firearms licenses, apparently.
Wow,
really?
That is apocryphal, but apparently that is about the number. 40,000 firearms holders with deer who are allowed to shoot deer on their license. And, you know, all I'll do is leave you with a thought that it's thought that if there are 3 million deer in the UK, then we probably ought to shoot 1 million a year, therefore. Then that would mean that each person has to do about 50. So this gives you one of the scales of the problem we have in the UK with actually controlling deer, is that there aren't enough people doing it, and there isn't enough access for people to get into it, which is why I think the syndicate model is such a good one. And I think that and somebody said earlier, how do I get into deer management? Join a syndicate. Honestly, join a syndicate rather than go out and try to find a piece of land that you might be able to get managed. Join a syndicate. You'll get mutual support. You'll have high seats available. You'll have advice from other members. And I think that the syndicate system is such a good one for getting people into the sport.
There you go. Thank you, Mike.
Big pleasure, guys. Lovely to talk. And next time you see me, give me a honk and we'll have a cup of tea or something.
Will do.
Thanks, Mike. Take care.
You'll probably see me driving around Cirencester in a half track. That'll be the next one.
Yeah.
Amazing. Look forward to it.
Thanks, guys.